This Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live.
We build these aircraft in Canada, and it meets our needs.
Made in Canada. Ottawa approves a deal with Swedish-based Saab on aerial surveillance that includes a boost to manufacturing here at home. What could it mean economically? Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, Stephen Fuhr, is here.
We are in the midst of real deep bilateral friction.
Global maneuvering. Canada works to be less reliant on the U.S., but are there risks of closer ties to China? Former U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan joins us.
It's clear he wants out of this. There's no denying it.
Potential deal. The U.S. and Iran reach a tentative agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What's needed before shipping lanes fully reopen? I'll ask retired Royal Canadian Navy Vice Admiral Mark Norman. It all starts right now on Rosemary Barton Live. Hello, I'm David Common. Thanks very much for joining us. Rosie is away. Canada is looking to Europe for its new multi-billion-dollar airborne surveillance system. The Fed selected Swedish company Saab to negotiate a deal for its GoldenEye aircraft, preferencing a European bid over two American ones, though the PM pointed out U.S. tech is still in the Swedish planes.
At the heart of the globalized system is the Canadian-made Bombardier Global 6500, an aircraft that includes 20% U.S. content, which gives a sense of just how integrated these defense systems are.
Saab is trying to score another deal with Canada to sell some of its Gripen fighter jets, while Canada has a deal to buy up to 88 F-35 jets from American Lockheed Martin. Last year, Carney asked the military to investigate whether it could cut back some of that F-35 order and buy fighter jets from perhaps another manufacturer. I spoke earlier with Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, Stephen Fuhr, about the message we should take from the deal with Saab. Stephen Fuhr, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. So the Swedes were pitching this as a package deal. They had the Arctic surveillance or the surveillance aircraft, plus they had the Gripen fighter jets. They said, buy both of them, we'll give you a deal. Federal government moving ahead just with the surveillance aircraft. Why not the package?
Well, we are moving ahead with the identified capability that you talked about. So the AEWC aircraft, that's the one we're moving forward with. It's a identified capability that the military needed. It's low risk, and it meets our broader policy objectives with as opposed to going and buying it outright from somebody else. So build, partner, buy. That's the way we're doing things moving forward.
The idea, of course, was that Sweden continues to try to push hard to get Canadian business to buy the Gripen fighter jets. And everybody in the aftermath of the announcement is trying to figure out, is this a signal that we are less likely or more likely to buy those Gripen fighter jets? Would you like to fill us in on where things might be leaning?
They're really unrelated. AEWC is a battle space manager. It's a sensor, and it works with all fighters in the battle space. So it was an identified, like I said, identified capability that the Canadian Armed Forces wanted. It was in the defense policy. We pulled that capability forward by years, just like we pulled submarines forward by years. We need to get these new capabilities to our forces much faster. We need to be more resilient. And this is just what we're doing. This particular procurement is extra, I think, exciting for Canada because we can actually not only build these aircraft for our own needs, but we can build them for export. And there is a big demand in the world for these aircraft. So while Canada spools up on the capability itself, because it's a new capability for Canada, if things work out the way that they're headed now, we'll be building these aircraft, not just the air vehicle, which we already build here in Toronto, but we'll be militarizing them here in Canada for export to the world, which is exactly what we want to do.
The Prime Minister, because you mentioned submarines, the Prime Minister was very clear that by the end of June there will be a decision whether it's South Korean or German submarines that we go with. He's putting a key timeline on that. Is there a key timeline on deciding whether to buy more F-35s or whether to go with a mixed fleet and get those Gripen aircraft?
Well, I think the important thing to think about here is we haven't slowed anything down. So just to repeat here, we have contractual commitments with Lockheed Martin for 16 aircraft. We have purchased long lead items for an additional 14. So we're in for 30 airplanes, and we will decide. We'll make a decision on what the full picture looks like when we're ready to make it. And we're moving forward. We're building infrastructure, so we're not slowing anything down, and we'll make the right choice for Canada when we're ready to make it.
On the surveillance aircraft, as you've described them, those you had the choice of two other options. Both of them were American. In not going to the Americans, do you think that the U.S. firms are taking a message from that?
I mean, I guess people will take messages however they want to look at stuff. We are buying American in other respects. We just purchased, and we haven't even taken delivery of them, P-8 surveillance planes, which I think was the right choice for Canada. That's a Boeing product. We purchased 14 of those aircraft with an option for 2 more. So we are buying American. There's some other systems that I could talk about. It's just that we build these aircraft in Canada. They're an amazing aircraft. They come with an order book for other countries, and it meets our needs. So in this particular case, it meets our broader policy objectives while we are delivering for the Canadian Armed Forces. So, a stronger, more resilient Canada is better for Canada, it's better for the U.S., it's better for the world.
You get asked about the F-35s all the time, and today's not going to be any exception to that. I'm going to ask you more. I listen to podcasts, and I hear Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer of the F-35, bragging in ads on podcasts about how much of the F-35 is made in Canada. And it's true, there are components that are made in Canada, not just for the Canadian aircraft. They're made for all aircraft of all the countries that have ordered. They're pushing hard. Could they do more to land more business from Canada?
Well, when you talk about Lockheed Martin, whether it be F-35 or Type 26 or they bought Sikorsky, so Cyclone helicopters. We have a broad book of work with that company. We are now starting to communicate with that company in that space. Hey, listen, it's not just one thing or another. We have this big, broad book of work. So do we want more foreign direct investment? Of course we do. Do we want to spend more money in Canada to support Canadian companies? Yeah, we want to do that too. So the bigger question is, what's in the best economic interest of Canada? So whether it be Lockheed or Boeing or any of these other big companies who already have a significant footprint in Canada and contribute to the Canadian economy, if they want to participate, we invite them to continue to invest here in Canada, build out their workforce, new bricks and mortar. We're open to all that. And the Americans build great products. And as I mentioned, we're still buying those products, but we like to buy from ourselves, and we'll work with other people as well.
Let me ask you, because you do mention the Cyclone helicopters, is that, although those are not terribly old, they have been problematic in the Canadian Armed Forces, is that something you would look to replace?
Well, I will reiterate your sentiment. They are problematic, and there are some big lessons to be learned. It's a longer conversation than just the short few minutes we have together. We need a maritime helicopter capability for the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force. And that is a problematic program. We are looking at different ways we can to mitigate, to get more serviceability and more capability out of that machine. And there may be some tough decisions to make moving forward, but right now we're just looking at the options.
When you talk about tough decisions, is one of them potentially just saying we got to cut our losses, that investing more may not be the right move?
Well, there's a lot of things to think about. Sure, that's always, you could say that about any particular system that you're looking at. I guess from a broad perspective, that is always an option. It's not a preferred option. So we're going to see what we can do to get better serviceability, better mission effectiveness, and get that helicopter doing what we bought it to do.
Stephen Fuhr, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, from helicopters back to that surveillance plane. What do the Americans make of Canada tapping Sweden for the contract? We're going to hear from the former Biden-era National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, about Canada's defense push. You are watching RBL. Global defense contractors gathered in Ottawa this past week for CANSEC, the largest defense and security trade show in Canada. Mark Carney became the first Prime Minister ever to speak at that event. Defense has been a top priority for the Prime Minister, who ramped up spending on national defense as he looks to leverage that sector to help shore up the broader economy. Also in attendance at CANSEC was the former U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The regular host of this program and the chief correspondent, political correspondent for CBC News, Rosemary Barton, spoke to Sullivan one-on-one about that defense procurement, the Russia-Ukraine war, and a whole lot more.
Jake Sullivan, nice to see you. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
Thanks for having me.
This past week, Canada announced it is going to begin negotiations to buy a fleet of aircraft from the Swedish company Saab over U.S. contenders. I wonder what you make of that decision, given Canada and the United States' long security relationship, the fact that Canada is choosing to go in that direction.
Look, as an American, I'll always root for and advocate for American companies, but I would also make the point that diversification and resilience are the watchword of the day, and building a stronger web and network of allies and partners who are all supporting one another's defense industrial bases, that's in our common mutual interest, including the American national interest. So having Canada working together with Sweden and with other NATO allies to do procurement of capabilities that can serve all of us, I don't see this as a zero-sum issue. I see this as adding to the collective strength of the alliance and of North American defense.
I mean, that's a diplomatic response, but I'm not sure everyone in the administration, the current administration, would agree with it. The decision, for instance, by Canada to become the first non-European country to join the SAFE initiative. Do you worry that is going to cause the current administration to be further frustrated with Canada, or to respond or react?
It's certainly possible. The current administration has shown its instinct to take pretty tough punitive measures against countries that it thinks crosses it. It has done so specifically with respect to Canada before, and it could do so again. My view is that we are in the midst of real deep bilateral friction over a number of issues, and this is a current we're going to have to navigate. But I really hope that people will keep their eye on the bigger picture in the longer term as well, that there are just some certain fundamental drivers of the U.S.-Canada relationship that matter to us: our geography, our democracy, our shared need to build industrial and innovation strength. So I'm hopeful that we can somehow get through the current travails and come out the other side, not with the exact same relationship we had before, but still with a strong and robust partnership.
Yeah, you say it's a point of friction. Our Prime Minister calls it a rupture point, says that the relationship is really never going to go back to the way it was. So what would lead you to believe that it could at least get to a better place than where it is now, whether it be from an economic or security perspective?
Well, first of all, I think that when you look at the fundamentals, when you look at our need to invest together in common continental defense, that is not going anywhere. Second, when you look at just the depth of economic links between the U.S. and Canada, that's not going anywhere either. And third, I actually believe this is an important moment for the relationship to adapt, to adjust, to evolve. So I agree with the Prime Minister, it's not going back to how it was before. But actually, as Canada diversifies with other countries, as it builds deeper economic and security links with European countries, with Asian countries, with others, I actually think this can serve the bilateral relationship too, because the more our relationship is embedded in this larger network of like-minded democratic allies, the better for both of us. So I think in the end, common sense and shared interest will shine through. But of course, that's not inevitable. It's going to require work, and it's going to require political leadership from the United States. And I hope that we will see that in the future.
You talked about diversifying trade. One of the places where the Prime Minister has turned to is India. The other place is China. Obviously, the President was recently in China too. But given your background, I wonder what you would warn about when it comes to getting too close to China, even from an economic perspective.
Yeah. Look, I want to start by saying of course, Canada is going to have an economic relationship with China. The U.S. is going to have an economic relationship with China, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I do believe that China's current economic model, which is heavily investing in dominating advanced manufacturing sectors across the board at the expense of the industrial base of virtually every other industrialized country in the world. This is a huge challenge. And it's a challenge for Canada, it's a challenge for the United States, it's a challenge for Europe, it's a challenge for everyone. So I do believe that Canada should be cautious about becoming dangerously dependent on China in certain industrial areas at the cost of Canada's long-term industrial and innovation muscle. I think this is a big challenge, and it is something that collectively the democracies of the West should be working on together. And that is why I find it so difficult to watch the current administration in the United States actually fighting with our allies rather than aligning with our allies against this very significant challenge.
I want to ask you a couple questions about Iran because of the very significant role you played during the nuclear deal negotiations during the Obama administration. What do you make of the conflict and where it is at right now, Jake Sullivan?
I think that the United States is in a very difficult spot strategically. Iran has shown it can shut the Strait of Hormuz, and we don't have the capacity to force it back open. Iran has shown that it can withstand bombing and blockades and hold the rest of the region at risk, in fact, hold the global economy at risk. And what's going to happen at the end of this, in my view, is we will end up back in a nuclear deal that looks a lot like the deal President Trump pulled out of back in 2018, and a lot like a deal he could have had without putting the US and the rest of the world through this war, which I think was misbegotten from the beginning. But of course, I believe we're going to end up in some kind of diplomatic outcome. There is still the risk that the war could resume and the situation could deteriorate even further, and we're going to have to watch carefully to see what unfolds in the coming days.
Based on your experience negotiating with the regime, what should we be watching for in terms of what the U.S. administration may have to give up in order to get this resolved? Because obviously the domestic pressures on the president right now around this are fairly intense.
I think there are three things to watch for. One is the Iranians are definitely going to demand some form of sanctions relief, significant sanctions relief. That's going to have to be part of any agreement that happens here. And so the president will have to address that demand from the Iranian side. Second, it's not entirely clear what exactly the constellation of decision-making is in Tehran right now. They have obviously taken severe blows, the elimination of the supreme leader, the elevation of a new supreme leader, a new cast of characters in decision-making roles. How they come to a common negotiating position is something to watch as well. And then third and finally, we're going to have to see the extent to which Iran thinks we hold the cards now, so we're just going to keep increasing our demands. I think that would be a mistake on the Iranian side, that they should do a good and solid deal as opposed to try to go for a maximalist position. But it's something we're going to have to watch as a dynamic in these negotiations.
I'm going to end on Russia-Ukraine because it's obviously of concern to a lot of this country as well. It does seem as though the president has shifted focus away from trying to get a deal between Ukraine and Russia. Do you believe it to be possible right now? And if it's not going to be the U.S. president that is brokering that, where does that come from?
Well, first, the dynamics on the battlefield have shifted in Ukraine's favor in a real way. They are able to hold more Russian forces at risk, push Russian forces back, hold the line against Russian advances, and also strike deeper and deeper into Russia itself, even as they're continuing to take the onslaught from a Russian aerial bombardment. So there's a lot of pressure on Moscow right now, and I think we should watch that dynamic carefully. In terms of the negotiations, I think President Trump will try to get back to playing some role to push the parties to the table. I fear that he's going to try to twist the arm of the Ukrainians, but they are fundamentally less reliant on others now than they were a couple of years ago, and I don't think the Ukrainians will be pushed into a deal that they don't, I think, generates a just and lasting peace. So for me, the key thing to watch right now is the dynamics on the battlefield and the position Ukraine is in, because the stronger they are there, the stronger they will be in an ultimate negotiation.
Jake Sullivan, thank you for your perspective on all those various topics. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
The federal government is moving on multiple fronts to make Canada an energy superpower.
We have what they want. Canadians expect us to produce it in a responsible way.
It is more headlines without deadlines, announcements without actions.
Nisga'a Nation President Eva Clayton joins me ahead to discuss what the deal for a new LNG plant will mean for her community. Plus, the Sunday Scrum is back to get into what this and other energy deals signal about Ottawa's priorities. I'm David Common, and this is Rosemary Barton Live. The Siliciums facility in British Columbia is just one of the major energy projects the federal government is looking to fast track as Mark Carney's Liberals talk about turning Canada into what they call an energy superpower. But the push to embrace oil and gas has cost the Liberals one of their MPs, former Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. All of it fodder for our Sunday Scrum. We go back to Marie Vastel, who's an editorial writer for Le Devoir, and Ryan Tumulty, who is a Toronto Star political reporter in Ottawa, plus Rob Benzie, Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. Good day once again to all of you.
Hi there.
Hi.
And Rob, let me start with you. The LNG deal, this has been something in the works since 2014. It was at one point said that there was no way this could move forward. The fact that it is, what does it say?
Yeah. I mean, it's good news for Canada and for the oil patch and for Canada's dreams of being an energy superpower. David, you know, this dates back. The 2014 was when Stephen Harper's Conservatives were still in power, and it was Stephen Harper who 20 years ago, 2006, coined the phrase "emerging energy superpower" for Canada. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, he's really trying to recast this country in a different way. And it's interesting to me that it's now a Liberal government under Mark Carney that's kind of realizing that vision. And of course, there is a political cost to Mr. Carney within the Liberal Party, having lost Stephen Guilbeault, his former Quebec lieutenant, a former minister in his government, a former environment minister in Justin Trudeau's government. And of course, there was that letter that was signed by Mr. Guilbeault and 13 other MPs that Radio Canada reported on, about people within the Liberal caucus concerned about this MOU with Alberta to build a bitumen pipeline to the Pacific coast. So there's a whole bunch of balancing that Mr. Carney is doing. And, you know, we talked about this in the first panel, and it's part of that really tricky tightrope that he's on.
And Marie, when we look at how Carney got here, some of it was support from typical traditional NDP supporters who voted for the Liberals this time. He's now lost Guilbeault, the one-time Quebec lieutenant for the party. What does this do for him, Carney, in Quebec and more broadly?
Well, I think to Rob's last point, it shows that there is a sort of deficiency in Mr. Carney's political sensitivities, I would say, because politics is a question of pragmatism in governing, for sure, and I don't think anyone is questioning sort of the government management aspect of Mr. Carney's reign so far. But politics is also diplomacy. It's also a question of equilibrium between regions, but also between priorities, between values. And I think what we're seeing is on certain issues that balance, either in public reactions to, let's say, Mr. Guilbeault leaving, or in priorities of government policy, that balancing act isn't always quite balanced, I guess I would put it that way. And you get results that you see. And yes, Mr. Carney got elected with NDP votes. He also got elected with progressive Liberal votes and progressive Liberal MPs and progressive Liberal ministers. Not a lot of them are left in cabinet, but it is a big part of that party. And some of them are quite struck at what has changed in the span of a year in terms of those policies. And I think Mr. Guilbeault's departure really kind of embodied the two solitudes, not only regionally, because it's seen as sort of almost a tension relief in Western Canada that Mr. Guilbeault is gone, and maybe now they can progress on national unity and economic reconciliation. But opposite in Quebec, he's seen as an environmental symbol, which his departure kind of says a lot about where the Carney government is on environmental policy at this point. It's seen as quite a rupture. But I also see two solitudes ideologically, between that pragmatism of we need to focus on national unity, economic growth, energy superpower, and the more progressive Liberals who are now, I think, thinking, well, if Guilbeault can't even stay in that party, even as a moral conscience for the Carney Liberals, then what does it say about the place of the environment for that government? And I think that's a challenge for sure in Quebec, because Mr. Guilbeault is quite known and respected, but I think also for progressive Liberals across the country.
Ryan, I'll get you to pick up on this. If I've got to give Marie credit for working two solitudes into this, first of all, but if the Carney Liberals are preferencing economy over everything, how long can they continue to do that? Do we always need to have a foe at hand to say that the economy has to take priority?
Well, I would say that, since he has been doing this, his poll numbers have only gone up. We talk about the potential rupture inside of the Liberal Party, but those 14 Liberals, 13 that we don't know of, signed that letter back in April. Since that time, I would say Mr. Carney has only leaned harder into economic decisions over environmental ones. And since that time, Mr. Guilbeault is the only one of them who've put their hand up and said, I've got a problem with this. The rest of them, we don't even know their names. So they are not necessarily prepared to quit or raise a big stink over these environmental concerns. They're being heard in caucus. And then the government is moving in a different direction. And I think, these LNG projects in particular are on a scale that is huge in Canada. The first LNG project in Canada, LNG Canada Phase 1, was the largest private sector project ever built in this country. Its second phase would be even larger. And this new project, Sealisums, is on roughly the same scale. So these are major economic drivers. Each one of them is probably worth half a percentage point to Canadian GDP. So these are big projects.
Rob, I'll turn to you.
No, Ryan's right. I mean, these and remember, there is pressure on Mr. Carney to show some results. Now, this LNG project to Germany is still provisional, and it wouldn't be till the 2030s that we'd begin seeing LNG shipped for 26 days, David, from the Pacific coast through the Panama Canal across to Germany. So it's not the quick fix that people like Pierre Poilievre are understandably asking for the Prime Minister. I mean, we saw the news Friday that we're in a technical recession. That gives Mr. Poilievre some ammunition. So the pressure is on Carney. So yes, within the caucus, you've got this progressive flank. I think some of them will swallow their principles to get reelected. I think that's obvious. Politicians are going to be politicians. But at some point, the honeymoon will be over for Mr. Carney, and Canadians will be wanting to see some results, and will those results be relevant and prevalent in people's lives? I don't know. I'm not sure, David.
Yeah, I take your point that there's a longer lead time, but you need a pipeline if you're going to do this. You can't export oil and gas by catapult. Marie, I will throw to you for the last word on this.
Well, yes, it's investment. Yes, it's reconciliation of regions of the country. I would just point out that Europe's demand for LNG went down 18% between 2020 and 2024, and the world production is already going up 40% as of what's planned right now between 2024 and 2028. I think there are questions that can be asked about whether LNG is the best business model if this is only going to be ready in 2030. Are we going towards an industry where the market will already be saturated? And I think those are legitimate questions to ask. Yes, investment, but is it the best investment for where the energy market is going? Or should we focus on critical minerals, which, yes, will take time to develop, but we wouldn't be coming into it once the market is saturated? I think there's a business model question to be asked, and whether we're going where we should be banking.
All right, Marie, Ryan, Rob, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you, David.
See ya. All right, this LNG will go to Germany from the BC coast. Let's take a look more at the project.
This province is at the forefront of Canada becoming a clean and conventional energy superpower. It is also becoming a global example of a new model for energy development, one that prioritizes Indigenous partnership and cleaner growth.
That is the Energy Minister, Tim Hodgson, touting the international demand for Canadian energy exports. The deal will eventually see 1 million metric tons shipped from Silicim's LNG facility in northern British Columbia. It is located on the territory of the Nisga'a Nation, and they have an ownership stake in this project. Let's turn to the president of the Nisga'a Nation, Ava Clayton, who joins me live. Good morning.
Good morning.
Give me a sense of what you need. 1 million metric tons would go to the Germans. Do you need more customers to actually make this a reality?
Yes, we continue to work on that. We are pleased to see the strong interest from around the world. Recent events in the Middle East only heighten the focus on Canada, and it has seen a very predictable partner in the energy space.
This project would have considerable benefit for the Nisga'a Nation, which has been deeply involved for more than a decade in the planning and execution. What is the lesson that you are taking from deep Indigenous involvement, not just consultation, but ownership in a major energy project? What have you learned?
We've learned that the Indigenous people that we've engaged with are deeply excited about managing prosperity rather than managing poverty, and they have committed to come forward with solutions.
How would Indigenous participation work in this project, whether it's the construction of a potential terminal north of Prince Rupert, or a pipeline to get it there, or the extraction of the gas itself from northern BC?
They'll be looking at the economic growth within their their particular space, but for the Niska Nation, to put it in perspective, as an example, one project like this can contribute more than 50% of the nation's budget each and every year during operation. And that's tens of millions of dollars a year for improved services and permanent jobs at the site.
Ava, this is certainly not the only energy project in this country that has Indigenous involvement. There are many of them. This may well be the largest, as far as I know. But there are a number of other Indigenous groups across the country that do not feel they have been consulted or feel opposed to, be it pipelines or other energy projects. When you meet, when you take phone calls, when you gather with others in the broader Canadian Indigenous community, do you feel tension? Do you feel consultation? What is your experience?
No, the atmosphere of when we meet with the Indigenous people is one of excitement, one of a feeling of needing to move forward faster. But the work continues to go ahead, and they are very excited about the project. And notice has gone out to everyone that along for many years, over a decade. And when notices of meetings go out, they're also sent to everyone so that they can participate.
You will need more customers, as we've discussed, to make this a reality. There's no question that today, given the Strait of Hormuz, given everything going on, that there is a deficit of LNG globally. There's a great need, but it will take years to get such a major infrastructure project off the ground and actually exporting LNG. Who would the customers be in 5, 10, 20 years' time?
That would be up to the project team, who will always be there to do the work. And there'll be more work along the way to get us to FID.
To get you to that stage. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And within the community, the Niska Nation is so vast across such a very large area, but is there right now excitement in the community that so much of the country has focused its attention on what is happening in your corner of the world?
Yes, there is excitement within the Niska Nation, and there's they have been preparing themselves for the work. They have been preparing themselves in terms of training. The Niska Nation, our territories are remote, and there aren't very many opportunities for our talented young people to build the careers and the family in the Nass Valley. And we are looking to change that by becoming a partner of choice for major project proponents with Niska values. We have been open to developing our projects with very close eye on the values of the Niska Nation, which is environmental stewardship, participating in governance, significant employment, contracting, and financial participation.
Ava Clayton, very good to meet you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The United States and Iran fired at each other at least twice this past week, even though there was a ceasefire in place. Well, there is a bigger deal that is in the works to try to end the war. Will it stick? I'm going to speak with retired Canadian Vice Admiral Mark Norman to get a sense of the talks and what could happen next. You're watching RBL. President Trump is looking to change several terms of a proposal to end the war on Iran, according to U.S. media. The administration says it's prepared to restart attacks if a deal isn't reached.
Right now, we're focused on being postured and prepared to re-engage if we have to. I mean, this is a high-stakes negotiation.
Reports suggest the two sides are close to agreeing on a framework deal. The U.S. has sent a new proposal to their Iranian counterparts, launching another round of negotiations. To understand how close the two sides are to a peace deal and what to make of these renewed threats, I spoke with retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman earlier.
Well, good morning, David. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I want to speak with you about the possibility of whatever we call it, a ceasefire extension, a 60-day deal, something that gets us to something more enduring. President Trump reportedly sending this deal back to his negotiators. Is it your sense that the president really wants a deal and that this is just fine-tuning?
Yeah, so they're using the language of a new framework. I'm not sure how much of that is branding versus actual practicality. It's clear he wants out of this. There's no denying it. And I think he needs to be able to declare some level of success. And the challenge, of course, is that the Iranians still are, to use his own language, holding more of the cards, I think, than he expected. And so this is going to be a tough go, whether we start over or not. I mean, fundamentally, there's 3 or 4 issues here that haven't changed.
Even when you talk about the Strait of Hormuz, perhaps the Americans didn't expect that the Iranians would hold these cards, but it almost seems as if the Iranians were surprised at how many cards they hold.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, they would have war-gamed this. And in fact, I can remember back when I was still serving, these were scenarios that we would have played out. But nonetheless, they really have now ended in a position of relative strength. And the fact that they're exercising the level of control over the strait is disturbing. And they're now talking in their own legislative language about declaring sovereignty over the strait, which is even more concerning as we go forward.
In fact, there is some discussion, and this is hardly locked down, but there's some discussion that Oman, which is on the other side of the strait, along with Iran, would in some future deal potentially control more of that strait. There's been talk of tolling, about that being a more permanent feature. Is tolling what has been an international waterway sustainable?
No, it's not. And I mean, this would be a very disturbing precedent. And I think, notwithstanding the other concerning issues with respect to, the human toll, the damage to Iran, the nuclear program. I mean, to me, this is probably one of the most concerning issues that has to be resolved. And it has to be resolved to the shared satisfaction of the international community, which means we can't be setting precedents that could then be applied potentially to other areas around the world. So long answer, but this can't be an outcome.
I want to talk to you about defense procurement happening in this country, in Canada. And before I go on to the individual files, I just want to ask you, because you headed up the Navy and you were in the senior ranks of the Navy at a time where only one service, the Navy, the Air Force, or the Army, seemed to be able to procure anything at any one time because there just wasn't the money there. When you look at what is happening now, what does it say to you about the change in government tone, in the attitudes of Canadians, that there is a willingness to spend and spend big on defense?
Well, I mean, at the macro level, it's encouraging. Regrettably, it is necessary, and we can't lose sight of that as a geostrategic reality in the world that we find ourselves in. I am very pleased to see the Carney government taking such an active role in leading this. The Prime Minister's participation, for example, in last week's show in Ottawa, CANSEC, was unprecedented, and I think it demonstrates a genuine commitment. Back to your question, however, these are real challenges. They're different challenges. I left in a period of significant constraint. We now have an organization that has to figure out how to expand and grow and do it responsibly, which means even though government and Canadians writ large have agreed to spend billions, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars on these necessary capabilities, we have to do it smartly and we have to do it responsibly.
You mentioned CANSEC, the Prime Minister announcing at that conference that Canada would be pursuing the Global Eye. And this is a Swedish system, a surveillance system that goes on board a Canadian-built aircraft, a multi-billion-dollar contract. In so doing, the Carney government had a choice: go with the Swedish bid or go with one of two American bids. Now, in years past, it would have been more than likely that we would have gone with the American bid. That we didn't this time, what does that say to you?
Yeah, well, we've traditionally taken that path because it was easy, it was convenient, and I think it's an important distinction as we go forward. We're not doing this alone. There's other partners in Europe and elsewhere who are procuring this aircraft. We will be an integrated part of the production and supply chain, which I think is exactly the kind of economic advantage that we want to see and that the Prime Minister and his government have been talking about. And the fact that it is a commercially available aircraft built in Canada means that it's sustainable in the long term. So, you know, I see this as a win-win. Undoubtedly, it is sending messages south of the border. But again, we're not alone. Many of the European partners were also considering U.S. technology, U.S. capability, and have explicitly said they won't do it. So, you know, I think we're in a good place, notwithstanding the sensitivities south of the border. And, you know, that this is a good decision for Canada.
Lastly, just because you were the commander of the Navy, I do want to ask you about the subs. It's come down to a decision, and as we enter June, that decision will be made in the month of June. German or South Korean subs. There is no American bid here. Do you have a sense of which way we as a country might go?
I actually don't, and I'm not just playing
it seems like
neutral.
Nobody does.
Well, and I think that that is actually a good thing. Look, at the end of the day, both of these capabilities are state-of-the-art, world-class capabilities. But more importantly, the bids that have been presented from both Hanwha Ocean in Korea and TKMS in Germany, partnering with the Norwegians, by the way, are fantastic for the country. And so, in my mind, there's no bad choice here. And, you know, I look forward to hearing, like everybody else, what the outcome's going to be. But once that happened, let's be clear to you and your viewers, we're still in going to be months of negotiations. So not unlike the Saab aircraft deal, this is an announcement to enter into negotiation. The deal itself will take some time to be finalized. But ultimately, this is good, and it's good for decades to come.
Mark Norman, good to see you.
Thanks a lot, David. All the best to you and your viewers.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has penned a letter to the Prime Minister this morning calling for an emergency debate to address the state of Canada's economy. Poilievre writes, "You promised you would deliver the fastest growing economy in the G7. You delivered the only recession in the G7. This past week, Canada did slip into a technical recession after the economy contracted slightly for the second quarter in a row. Carney has yet to respond to Poilievre's letter. Thanks very much for joining us here on Rosemary Barton Live. Rosie will be back next week. I'm David Common. I'll be here tomorrow morning for CBC Morning Live.